views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The holidays are upon us, and so we thought this week we would do a Home to the Bronx for the Holidays show, featuring a brand new novel, that is this one, about growing up in the Bronx, and I'll put the word novel in quotation marks, more about that in a moment. The book is called BronxLand, and we will also reach back to some Bronx memories and rekindle some of the spirit of the old Bronx with some nostalgic Bronx photos of the old days in the borough of the Bronx. So let's get right to the fun and welcome in a lifelong Bronxite and author of that new book, which I've now held up for the third time. It's called BronxLand. Welcome to Paul Thaler. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Gary.
And back on BronxTalk, he was here many, many years ago, the creator and editor of Back in the Bronx, a Bronx nostalgia magazine, and the Back in the Bronx Roadshow, if you will. It's always nice to have Steve Samtur on the program. Nice to see you again, Steve. And we welcome both of you to the show. Let's start right in with BronxLand. Now, I had said right at the outset that it was a novel in quotation marks. As I was reading the book, and you know this because we've talked about it, I said, you know, this really sounds like Paul's life, pretty much. Tell me where the book diverges from reality, or what is the reality and what is the fiction and novel aspect of it?
Well, you know, originally when I wrote the book, it was a memoir. And I was actually very, very happy with it. And then
it was actually a real, a piece of nonfiction, autobiography,
memoir. And unfortunately, I gave it to a friend, and he said to me, he said, your family will be very, very pleased reading it. And given the fact that I wanted a slightly bigger audience for the book.
The people in your family.
I decided, I wasn't even sure if they were going to read it, frankly. But I decided it might be better off bringing in kind of my fictional counterpart in Paul Wolfenthal, my protagonist. So he does bear a strong resemblance to his author, but it is partly fiction for sure.
Is that a challenge to know? Well, I know what my own life story is, but now you have, and there are so many wonderful moments in there, whether you're waiting outside Yankee Stadium to meet the players, or riding your bicycle around certain neighborhoods, or even the famous day, which I know Steve knows a lot about, when JFK came to the Bronx, and you talk about that. Was it hard to weave that in and out of reality or fiction, or did you just kind of do it like you wanted to do it?
Well, actually, the fiction was a wonderful avenue to talk about the real stuff of the Bronx. So I'm at Alexander's department store, which certainly was very true with my mother. And there was, in fact, this incredible rally for John F. Kennedy outside of Alexander's.
But by the way, I have to just interject. People wouldn't believe that JFK stood at a rally. And now for folks who don't know, we can't make any presumptions, Alexander, right in the corner of Fordham Road in the Grand Concourse, a landmark spot in the Bronx, and JFK came to run for president right there on the street corner.
Well, what makes this particularly interesting is that JFK was a Bronx boy.
That's right.
He actually spent 2 to 3 years in Riverdale, and he went to Riverdale Country Day School. And there's actually a photograph of his class picture in BronxLand. And when he introduces himself on Fordham Road, he lets the crowd of about 20,000 folks that line both sides of the concourse know that I'd like you to know I am a Bronx boy myself. And there was a cheer. And
Now, were you
laughter.
there that day?
I
In
was.
reality, in the book, he's there.
Yeah, that's one of the fictions. But I was at Alexander's many times.
Many times.
Yes.
Well, one other story that you and I had talked about, which comes up, and one of the things I like about the book, and it is BronxLand, is it's not all positive. I mean, we know that we have thorns, and we had them then, and we have them now. It's well written, and it's a difficult story of a boy who disappears, and you talk from the perspective of the parent, a youngster watching the parents go through it. But that was based on a real case that folks who grew up when we grew up will remember. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, that set of chapters actually was modeled, if that's the word, after the kidnapping of Eitan Pates back in the 1980s. So it is a generation in the future,
Removed.
but
and he was not in the Bronx either, as a matter of fact.
No, but his story always stuck with me. And the freedom of writing fiction allows you to
There you go.
to bring that into the narrative. And it's a very interesting time, the early '60s. There is that element to it, the kidnapping story, but it's the time of the Cold War. It's a time where Vietnam is kicking in. It is the time of the civil rights movement, and that actually plays into BronxLand
And
also.
you put it all in a Bronx vernacular, in a Bronx perspective, and it's really a little boy riding his bike through the borough of the Bronx.
That's
It's
true.
a fascinating book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Gary.
Steve, you also, I think, found something real interesting when you looked through the book, and that you and Paul had a connection that none of the three of us were aware of.
Well, it's my life because I lived in his neighborhood. I lived around
Actually, in the real neighborhood, not
in the
the
real
fiction.
neighborhood, around the corner. We went to the same school, and interestingly enough, he references PS 82. His class was 710. I happened to be in class 710
Unbelievable.
in PS 82. You can't
Well,
make
were
this
you in
up.
the same class?
No,
One of
apparently
you is older than
this
the
was
other.
a fictional
Oh,
class,
that's right.
but mine was real.
Wow.
And so I couldn't believe the coincidence. And then we went to PS 26, and I won a yo-yo contest at Skippy's Candy Store across the street. I went to 82, and
It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So then you, like me and like others, I'm sure, who will eventually read it, one of the things I appreciated was sitting in those classrooms, and he described the relationship between a kid and another kid in the classroom in sometimes gross detail, but it was exactly how you felt sitting in those classrooms. Talk to me a little bit about, and for folks who don't know, and maybe there are current Bronxites who don't look at Back in the Bronx, what is Back in the Bronx about? I mean, I know about it, but let's talk to the people about it.
Coming up to 25 years back in Bronx, you said you're
Congratulations.
23 years with
On BronxTalk,
So issue 98, and it's basically a retrospective of the borough of the Bronx in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. People send in stories. I take the best of the best stories and I put it together in a quarterly edition, and I have ads in the back, people looking to find friends and neighbors. And after 50, 60 years, oftentimes people who put ads in will find people coming out of the woodwork, and they reconnect, and then the story goes on. What happened with that reconnection? I have letters to the editor, and we indicate what happens during those reunions.
I'm going to ask both of you the same question. What is the fascination with having grown up in the Bronx, with the idea that, gee whiz, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to diss anybody else's locale, but if you were to say I wanted to, do a show about Columbus, Ohio in the 40s, I don't know that you could, and again, sorry to all my friends and neighbors in Columbus, Ohio, but I don't know that you could, engender the kind of passion that you have over the years of people literally you do lectures in Paris and all over the world. So what is it about growing up? And you stay tuned because you're getting the same question.
Well, I think their neighborhoods, everybody had a specific neighborhood. I think there was 52 specific neighborhoods. I could be way off, but somehow I read 52. And basically, people lived the same way in each neighborhood, but they went out of the neighborhood to congregate in certain areas like the Concourse and Fordham Road, the Paradise Theater, Yankee Stadium. So there was a commonality of these neighborhoods reaching out to a central location.
That's interesting. And so everybody, you know, Paul mentioned Alexander's, and I said it was an iconic place for those of us who grew up there. We all went shopping at Alexander's, and you know that was a central place, so to speak. And just as you said, Yankee Stadium, Lowe's Paradise, and some of the others. So what about for you? I mean, you touched on it a little bit. You know, kind of growing up in the Bronx. What was special about?
There's something about the Bronx that's kind of part of your DNA, and you know.
No argument here.
I mean, I have friends out in California. I have one friend in particular who keeps wearing his cap that says the Bronx on it. And every time he comes back home, he actually tours, he actually walks the Bronx, his old streets. I don't know if it could be defined, but you know, there was a life to the Bronx, and it wasn't always rose-colored glasses that we looked through for sure. There were issues growing up as part of that book, in fact. But where else can you go to a movie theater? And really, I think for the first time in my life, I actually saw stars.
Yes, well, we have pictures, by the way, which we're going to show of the Lowe's Paradise.
Yeah, the dome on top of that theater, you know. And then, of course, there was Yankee Stadium and our beloved Yankees. And the incident I mentioned there, where I'm waiting outside the gate for these Yankees to come, they were the gods. And Yankee Stadium was a place of worship. You know?
In reality, did you ever get a player's autograph in that scenario?
Well, in the book I don't, and actually in real life I don't. And so that is absolutely true.
I got a couple outside Yankee Stadium at some point.
No,
and I'll tell you, Bobby Richardson, this is a true story, Bobby Richardson used to walk into the stadium carrying empty boxes so he wouldn't have to sign. And we knew they were empty because he was just carrying them and they were bouncing around, so he wouldn't have to sign. Did you ever get autographs?
Well, I was a vendor at Yankee Stadium.
Oh, there you go.
And so I was able to talk to the ball players because back then you had to get there 3 hours earlier.
Right.
And sit in the bleachers. And so you would talk to certain players, and certain players you liked, certain you didn't. And sometimes when a ball went into the bleachers, if you liked the play, you'd throw it back. But if you didn't like the play, like Frank Crosetti, we'd make him go through the dugout in and get the ball. So it was interesting.
Nowadays they wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of the pictures that Steve gave us. Now, what are we looking at? What do we got here?
This is PS 82.
Oh, this is that school.
The schoolyard. That's
and which
my
is where?
schoolyard.
What neighborhood?
It's on off of Tremont, West Tremont Avenue and Harrison, off McCombs Road. And this is the back area where I used to play stickball. The key was to hit the ball over the fence. We thought it was 350 feet, but if you go back now, it's probably 175
yeah, I'm sure,
feet.
I'm sure.
Everything looks different.
And how old is that picture?
That picture goes back to around 1941.
And I will just interject that when I played stickball, we did the same thing at a different schoolyard. And, you know, it was like hit the fence was a single, over the fence was a double, across the street was a triple, and hit the building.
Exactly.
And then as we got older, we moved the things back. It had to be over the fence for a single, second floor for a double,
Right.
fourth floor for a triple, and you had to roof it for a home run. All right, no, keep going. We're nice to look at, but we really want to see more of these photos. This is an amazing photograph. And
This is Jan's out in Queens before it closed about 15 years ago. This is the kitchen sink. I remember it being more metal than plastic, but this is basically the size. I would think it feeds 8 to 16. The interesting thing is back in 1958, on the menu, the kitchen sink was $6.15. Today, one Jan's is left. It's almost $50. But the kitchen sink. Back in 1958, you could actually buy a kitchen sink for $50. Today, you get ice cream.
Well, I will tell you what's interesting about that for people who don't know. Jan's was an ice cream parlor, and we're going to show some pictures of it. And they had all different kinds of, you know, ice cream delicacies. And so if you had a party of 8 people, what people might not realize, that tub, that kitchen sink that you just saw was filled with 38 flavors, and people would just go and eat. And it was only $6.15.
15 cents back in 1958.
I believe that Jan's had, in fact, at least I write about this in Jan's. I have a paragraph that if in fact you were able to eat the kitchen sink, they would give you another one free. and many a teen almost died trying to.
Well, I
trying
remember
to
you
do
could
that.
get a Tuesday, which was TWO, and that was 2 ice cream sodas. All right, what do we got here? What is this?
That's PS 26, my elementary school.
Which is
across
where?
the street from Skippy's. This on West Burnside Avenue, off of University, between University and Andrews Avenue.
And look at all this space around it. You certainly
That
don't
was
get-
the old building,
That
and
was
there
the
was
old
a
building.
new building
Yeah.
built back
Since
in the
that time.
50s.
All right, keep going, folks. We got a million pictures. Okay, so now we're on the corner. This is what we said, Alexander's.
Uptown, it's Alexander's.
Right,
Yeah.
CUNY on the concourse is there now. PC Richards is
Yes,
there now.
exactly.
Yeah.
If I remember, down the block to the right was Sam Goody's had a music store down.
Well,
the block.
you mean down the block to the left?
No, well, down the concourse. to
Okay,
the
I
right.
remember down the block to the left was Cousins Record Shop
Cousins?
near the Vegas
Yep.
or Modell's.
All right.
Right. They were right. Modell's was.
And then
Yeah.
they had Robert Hall was one block near the Dollar Saving Bank, and Sutter's Bakery was there on the right.
All iconic places, and everybody who grew up in the Bronx.
Everybody knew Alexander's, but this is the new Alexander's. The original one was on Melrose and around 152nd Street.
Well, yes, that's right, and
Third
that
Avenue.
building still
Right.
exists. They're doing something with that building as we speak. All right, this is you can
This
see
is,
Arthur Murray's dance
Studio.
Wow.
If you go straight, you go to the Vegas and the Cousins Record Shop
toward Jerome Avenue.
towards Jerome Avenue, correct?
Right. All right, keep going. This I love, just so you can see
Great
the old
picture.
city buses,
Yeah, about probably 1960s, early 60s.
and the bus was 15 cents. I
And
think.
that was the number 12 bus. If you remember the BronxTalk, De Niro used to drive the number 12 bus to City Island because the 12 bus ran east and west on
It still does, of
Fordham
course.
Road. Yes, it does. Yep.
Go ahead. More Alexander's with a
Alexander's
different
In the
perspective.
50s, yeah.
Okay, now what is this?
Well, I recognize this
looks
because that's
like
PS 82.
I was going to say Tremont Avenue.
Right, and that's
West
Nelson
Tremont.
Avenue and McCombs Road and University Avenue.
About what year would that?
Probably in the late 40s.
Well, it
was sent
looks
to me
like-
by a subscriber.
Looks like you could get a parking space,
In fact, the next issue.
which you can't get now.
That was my street. I was at 50 West Tremont Avenue, so that was the neighborhood.
There you go.
The next issue of Back in the Bronx, we have a story on Dord's Pharmacy right on the corner, coincidentally. So she had a picture also when she worked
the
there in
pharmacy.
1954, the Dorns, yeah.
Wow. I think what's and this is the menu. We'll talk about that in a second.
1958, yeah.
I think what's nice is for people who haven't been in the Bronx that long. We have obviously many people who've come here since to find out that there was such a rich culture, a rich background beforehand. This is the menu when you'd go to Jan's, and on the left you see if it was your birthday, you ate for free. Of course, a number of times we would say, "Oh, it's my birthday," and they knew that was happening. Every now and then they would check like a driver's license or something, but the kids, what did the kids have to prove it was their birthday? But all of those items, by the way, on that menu were ice cream. Those would, it was like you.
Exactly.
It was an amazing ice cream.
It truly
parlor.
was.
And it was the place. Here's Crumbs, which
Crumbs
to me,
have two entrances, one on the concourse and the other one on 188th Street.
that is the Drake building to the left, right?
The Drake building is to the left, correct.
Right,
yes,
and then further down would be the Dollar Savings Bank.
Right, exactly. Sutter's.
Yes. Paul was talking, or Steve was talking about iconic places in the Bronx. Jan's was one of those places, and if there was and here's the interior of Jan's, which is just spectacularly beautiful. But if you would go after, let's say, a concert in one of the schools or after a graduation, you couldn't get a table. You'd have to wait. And so often at the end of an event, we'd send the family member to run there and grab a table because everybody from every school, whether it be Roosevelt or Evander or Clinton or Walton or the junior high schools, I remember I did it for my middle school, and then we called them junior high schools, would flood the place because that's where you'd go to celebrate everything that
And
that
this was
happened.
a place to show off your date. You wouldn't go here often because it was expensive. But if you had
At
a reason,
$6.15.
if you had a reason to go because there was a girlfriend that you wanted to show your friends, this is where you would take the date.
Where you would go. And we should say, for people who would say, well, where was Jan's? If you go to Kingsbridge Road right now, it is the Bronx Library Center. That is
Right
they
next to
built
it.
the Bronx
Yeah.
Library Center right on the.
Yeah.
All right, so
That's
this
Crumbs.
is the inside of Crumbs. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time there, Steve. What was Crumbs? A candy store.
Well, it was chocolates, upscale chocolates, ice cream also, wonderful hot fudge sundaes, and it was close because in proximity to the Paradise, it was a block.
Lowe's Paradise Theater.
The Janja had to meander another 3 or 4 blocks.
Right, so here you could go to the movies and then run in
Exactly.
for either beforehand and get some
Exactly.
something to eat. Very good.
The
Now, what is
interior.
this?
Is the interior of Crumbs.
Of Crumbs, and
1970s.
with an old-fashioned lunch counter,
Yeah, mhm.
and people would sit in suits and ties in
Right.
the candy store. Of course,
Yeah.
no,
It wasn't really a candy store in the true sense. It was a confectionery,
luncheonette. Okay.
luncheonette.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. What do we got? And this, of course, is the Lowe's Paradise. And I actually inserted some of my own photographs, which I took of the interior of the Lowe's Paradise. Paul, we could start with you. You remember it fondly.
Well, I do, and well, fondly and not so fondly. Actually, there was an incident which I don't necessarily have to go into in the book where a stranger accosts me at the Lowe's Paradise. I don't want to bring us down, though, in terms of remembering the Lowe's Paradise. But it was a
magnificent, and I have some pictures of
going
that.
to a museum almost.
And there were literally, you'd sit in the movie theater, and there were lights that looked like stars, and it was stars.
Oh, the entire dome was filled with stars.
With stars.
And actually,
what a wonderful way to see a movie.
What a wonderful way, and also the fact that in my neighborhood we didn't see stars. You know, there's too much light, and that might be one of the few places
that you
where
saw stars.
We'd actually see those.
So
stars.
this is the interior. These are some of the pictures that I took. The ornate interior of this theater, you know, folks who go to movie theaters now and they're, you know, modern theaters and they're kind of nice. Nothing like going to the movies in a palace like this.
Well, this dates back to the 1920s, I believe.
1929 it opened.
Yeah.
Vaudeville.
Yeah. And
let's take a look at some of the others. Look at this. This is the interior of the movie theater.
Yeah, incredible.
It was
And the
just
chances are, if you went to a large high school, your graduation took place at the Paradise because it could only.
It was the only one that could fit.
Accommodate the.
I graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School and had my graduation at the Paradise. Look at this? Look at the work on the. You see the stage to the left, and of course, prior to movies, there was burlesque shows and vaudeville shows and all that. I should say vaudeville, not burlesque. And look at it's just incredible. Steve, do you remember any movies you saw at the Paradise? I have one that I remember.
I like to tell the joke that I saw the 10 Commandments in the balcony, and the couple to my right were breaking 9 of them, but I won't say it.
Paul, any movies?
Actually, I remember a double horror film.
Wow.
The titles escape me at this moment, but I went there. It was a must-see, and I saw 2 of them back to back.
I remember in the early 60s, I saw The Odd Couple from the second or third row of the balcony, of that balcony that you're looking at right there. So now, is that it? Is that the picture? All the pictures that we've got? I remember getting into that theater. Those pictures were taken late 90s or I don't know, first couple of years of the 2000s, and now it's a church. Now
church.
I don't want to. I wish it was kind of available to more people.
It's still there, beautiful. The interior is.
Have you been in it lately?
Yes, not lately, but 10 years ago, and I heard it stayed as nice as it was.
Steve, you will be actually appearing and doing one of your shows at the Van Cortlandt Jewish Center on December 10th, and we've got some information about that. We can put that up. And your nephew, I guess, or cousin, is also
my cousin,
performing.
right?
Let's put that information up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was asked to do a show with my cousin. It's a brunch. December 10th, I'll be on from 10:30 until noon doing my PowerPoint presentation, and it's Life in the Bronx. I have 477 excellent slides. I do this all over the country, California, Nevada, Boca Raton, and in fact, up and down the Eastern coast. I'm doing this on my way to Florida, and we just sold out a month in advance in Rockville, Maryland. 200 people coming to the event.
And are they people who are from the Bronx or people who just are kind of interested?
Ex-Bronxites. They come.
They're all over.
But even if you're not a Bronxite, you will appreciate it because there are Bronx celebrities that everybody knows, whether you're a Bronxite or not.
Paul, BronxLand is available wherever books are sold now. That means on the web somewhere, right?
Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all of that.
Thank you so much for presenting BronxLand.
Thank you,
you so much for
Thank you,
tickling
Ryan.
our nostalgia. And we wish both of you good luck. BackInTheBronx.com and BronxLand is the book. Paul, one thing before we go. What of this is current? In your mind, it evokes, for me, it evoked some current thing. What in your mind makes it current?
Well, I think that it resonates in different ways. On a very basic level, I think it resonates in terms of kids growing up, coming of age, and sometimes the struggles that they go through to kind of go through adolescence.
Even though they're not quite the same, and a youngster of that age riding a bicycle through the Bronx, you're probably not going to do that.
And that certainly was a different time. But you know, the political elements in the book also kind of resonate today, also in different ways. So.
Pick it up, BronxLand. Check out BackInTheBronx.com. We thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And I don't know, we'll have you back. And next time we need more memories, or would you write another book? We'll have you all back. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. Send a tweet to @BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. We'll read them on the air during a future edition of the program. And you can check out our archives at BronxNet.org. You find Bronx Talk by following the Watch menu on the new BronxNet website. A new city council has been elected, and we will have the two Bronx Andys on the program next week. Councilmember Andy King and Councilmember Andy Cohn will join us to talk about the council and their respective Bronx districts. We'll cover all the different issues. We'll do that next week, and that will be the beginning of a series that we're going to do with Bronx council members. You can find about your particular neighborhood. Thanks to our producer, Lindsay Violet. Our director is Eden Martinez. We will see you next week.
I guess sometimes things just happen. Devastating things. Your whole world changes in an instant. That's what happened to me the day my mother had a stroke. I'm Paul George, and I want you to spot a stroke fast. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Protect the ones you love. Spot a stroke fast.